Angela, I am so excited to have you on today. We've known each other now for about a year. We're both in the UX world, and we met talking about, I believe it was AI and UX.
Yeah, you're right. Yes.
And we had a lovely conversation. We spoke about 3, 4 months back. And oh my goodness, when we had the conversation, I realized you're someone I wanted to get to know better and get to hear your story.
Mhm.
So I love we're at this point now where we can talk about your story and your path and your lessons learned. Thank you so much for being
I
here.
love
I'm honored.
Thank you for having me. The feeling was mutual. I was like, I need to get to know her better. Your content is incredible. And I've just loved getting to know you over the past year too.
I'm wondering if you can share at a high level what your life and career trajectory has looked like.
Yeah, I would say since I was a little kid, I wanted to be an artist. That was my dream from the beginning. I went to Colorado State and I got my bachelor's degree in fine art and studied painting. During that time, I also went to study abroad in Italy, which was a very formative experience for me and my career journey and just my life in general. And then my dream was always to move to New York. At the time, pre internet, that was the place to be because as an artist, to really live the artist's life and to soak it all up, you had to be in an environment like that. So I moved to New York and quickly learned the cost of living was going to make it very difficult to practice my art. I ended up finding UX through this company. They were creating a brand new group, and one of my incredible mentors helped me move into that group. And I found UX, and I felt like, again, I had found my people because it was this beautiful connection between art and business. And so I ran with that and I did both for a very long time. And now I've been a consultant on my own in the UX research and strategy world for the past 9 years, but I've been practicing UX for 16 years.
I'd love to talk about your experience with art, your experience with UX. I know it's not that separate. You spoke about you knew very early on that art was a part of you. When you were a little kid, was that something that was just a big part of your life or did it evolve over time?
Always. I mean, since I can remember, really early on, creativity has always been a part of my world. I was drawing just intuitively as a little kid. And so the more I followed that, the more I found interest in it and kept kind of running with it. And thankfully, my parents were very supportive of that too. So they kind of let me run with that as well, which was extremely helpful.
When you were studying abroad, you were studying in Italy, and then you mentioned the move to New York, where I understand for an artist getting started, New York is a lot. And yeah, cost of living and making a living there. When you first moved to New York, what were you aspiring for with your art?
Mostly, I was just, my goal was to figure out what it meant to be a working artist and to make a sustainable living as an artist. Fame was never a focus for me. I never wanted to be this big blue chip artist. I just wanted to be able to find a way to do it in most of my time. That was my big goal, to find other people who were doing that, see how they were making it happen. Of course, I heard a lot of those voices around me say, you'll be poor forever if you're
Yeah.
an artist. And I almost had a chip on my shoulder about that. I thought, people do it, they make it happen, and I want to figure out why. So New York was that environment where I felt like I could go and learn about that.
I've spoken with a lot of women about inflection points in their career, and you mentioned that you moved to New York thinking about art and the focus there. I know design has a big component of creativity, but I'm wondering, have you had an inflection point? Was there any pain or grief associated with letting go of a dream in the art world and shifting into UX, or did it feel like a natural progression for you?
I don't know if at that first point there was any grief. I
Yeah.
felt more excitement than anything because I felt like that was a path to get to my bigger goal, which was being able to make art in all of my free time. And
Yeah.
it also aligned with some of my values around creating thoughtful experiences for people, helping people navigate the world through software, and the creative problem solving part of that felt really exciting to me. I think if there was any challenge or grief with it, it was more, how can I make time? for my work
Yeah.
and follow this growing field that is growing so quickly and is so full of energy and stay on top of that and also be able to stick with my original plan.
Have you found the right balance, or are you still tweaking that?
Yeah, I think balance is something that is elusive. And I think I've started to think more about harmony and how these things can harmonize with each other because the more I've sought balance between the two, the more I've found it really challenging. And actually, to your earlier point, found some grief in that too, right? So, yeah, I think it's evolved. That ebb and flow has evolved over time between art and UX. And when I haven't been able to make art at all, that's when I felt really out of balance.
What I've recognized about you, Angela, and others, there's so much more to us than just that identity of a UX leader or UX consultant. And as you mentioned, this harmony is really important. I just wondered, given your expertise in the art world, how do you bring that art and creativity to your work with clients?
Although I've internally focused on the harmony, I've also
Yeah.
very much compartmentalized the two as well when it comes to presenting myself around them, even though they are both very tied to how I see the world and how I operate within the world. I've kept them hidden and separate from each other in some ways too. I think they have always very much informed each other.
Mhm.
The focus on art a lot is around beauty.
Mm.
There are a lot of amazing aspects to just beauty found in art alone, but a lot of art is really about shared humanity and it's about thinking differently and approaching our world and our ideas in new and different ways or combining ideas in new and different ways. And I think that's where there's a shared way of operating between art and UX. UX is very much about understanding people and understanding what is common between people and how you can create an experience that ushers people through in a really positive way, right? So
Mhm.
I think there's also an argument in the UX world. I hear it more often, of course, than in the art world that art is not design and design is not art. And that always triggers me a little bit
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
in one realm, that's true at its most simplest form. Design is in service of an audience or in service of a problem. And it's not necessarily about the creator of the solution. And then in the art world, it's more about the person creating, right? But
Yeah.
I think that's such a limiting way of looking at it.
Mhm.
And there's so much more beyond that.
It really resonated when you were saying you compartmentalized a bit. There was your UX world in life and your art life, and you kept parts of yourself a little bit hidden in certain areas. And that resonated because you and I have both talked about it's a messy world out there in many respects. It's messy in the UX world as well in the tech
Yeah.
community. It feels like it's a disconnect there that the tech community is trying to convince us don't show your whole self. Did you feel the need to hide parts of yourself in the UX world or tech world? Because I felt the same way too.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's probably multifactorial, like many
Yeah.
things. I think part of it is just me thinking maybe I wouldn't be taken as seriously if people knew because of that talk about art versus design and one not fitting the other. And then also, I think another thing that I brought to it was I just, to be really serious, I think this is changing more in our culture now. But I think there has been for a long time the expectation that if you're a growing professional and you're serious about your career, you stay in your lane and you focus on that lane and you communicate about it and you build a network in that lane. And going outside of it was deemed less professional. I really wanted to show that I was dedicated to this career and I wanted to show that I was serious about it and serious about doing good things in it. And I will also say that there's also not a lot of psychological safety in the
Yeah.
business world and the tech world for people to bring their whole selves to their work. There are environments that certainly are doing that well, But I think that my own thinking was mirrored back at me in different environments where maybe you should just keep that separate and it's safer just to shut that part off.
I think you're absolutely right. It is safer and oftentimes rewarded to shut that part off in the tech industry. I wonder though, we're having a conversation, an interview now for a public podcast where you're going to be sharing a lot about your art. I'm assuming
Yeah.
something shifted for you. You are
Yeah.
finding more of that. You're sharing more of yourself with your connections, but also the world. What shifted for you?
Yeah, I think it's been a work in progress for almost 10 years now, but I think that I had a big inflection point in 2016 when I had been through a pretty intense period of experiencing my own grief in my own personal life. And I took a painting class after work. I worked at this agency that ironically had also been better in the environments that I'd been in previously at allowing us to bring our whole selves to the work. So that felt freeing and great. But also personally, I was going through a lot during that time. And I took this painting course at night, and it was an abstract expressionist painting course, which is my jam anyway. But I just remember feeling so much catharsis in this class, meeting other people who are working full time and coming together in a structured format to just express and paint and just have this freedom. And I thought, these things are just so tied, and it's really helping me process what's happening in my life that maybe I need to weave these things together. So I actually started to think really seriously about making the jump to work on my own and lean more into my art. Through that time, I also decided there are all these skills that I've learned from UX around interviewing people and around watching people share their story too, because I think there's this other thing that happens in UX research that we take for granted that is really powerful. And that's the power of witnessing each other. And I've seen it in so many different interviews for software, right? It's never about the software, it's always about their lives. And you see
Mhm.
people actually physically, it's like a physical load has lifted off of them when they share part of their story. And I think it is because of that magic of being witnessed and witnessing each other in each other's lives and being able to share the details of our lives. And that I thought, wow, what a cool thing I could pair with to help other people who are experiencing grief. I could create commissioned paintings for people who want to tell their story and don't get a lot of formats to do that because as compartmentalization in our career happens, that happens a lot in grief and less so now too after the pandemic. Grief is such a taboo topic that people don't have a lot of environments to share that story.
I do know you have so much experience and expertise helping others with grief, where we all have our different configurations of challenges and disappointments and being broken open. And my experience with those moments that you were speaking of, I didn't go to an art class, but I was broken open. And I've spoken with other women who say the same thing. You're broken open, you're now seeing things clearly, you have all of these emotions and grief and you don't know what to do with it. And some of us go to therapy, which is excellent, but I and others have felt stuck sometimes when that opening happens. What would you tell women who have hit that point and they're not sure what to do?
Yeah, I think to your point, it's so personal, right? To know what is going
Mhm.
to resonate with you. For me, I really leaned into some things that were already inherent to me.
Yeah.
Certainly, therapy is incredibly helpful to me. And I will shout that from the rooftops. I think everyone can benefit from that, whether or not you're in a crisis moment when you're
Mhm.
just managing the pressures of the world right now. I think it's helpful on so many levels. I think, in addition to that, leaning into what had already resonated with me and been helpful to me was painting and creativity. And I think we all have something like that. We all have something that is life giving to us. And I think sometimes it's harder to listen to that or to know what that is when the pressures of work and your relationships in your life or whatever it may be. But really to tap into what sorts of things have lifted me up before? Was it exercise? Was it creativity? And start to find those environments where you can do more of those things. That was immensely helpful. That class that I mentioned was immensely helpful and just unlocked so much expression for me in a way that was unique to me.
Yeah, I mentioned we had spoken about AI and UX, and we connected about that, but I wouldn't say we super connect like, we care about AI and UX, but it's not typically the topic that I really feel a connection. I went to Angela Craven art.com and read a bit more about your story, and I loved it, and I was fascinated and inspired, and you were talking about with your paintings honor you described it as the beautiful mess of life. Can you speak to that a little bit? What does that mean to you?
Yes, I think about abstract expressionism, if anyone listening is not already familiar with it, is a way of painting that became famous in a movement where people would just paint intuitively, throwing paint on a canvas and just running with whatever was happening in that creation of the artwork. Jackson Pollock is considered an abstract expressionist, who's most famous for doing that. There are many people who did that. That really resonated me, particularly going back to that, what I mentioned about my study abroad in Italy, because I had a mentor there who was working in abstraction. And there was something so raw and authentic about that form of making art, a visual medium. Your goal is to share beauty, right? And that visual form of beauty. Getting to a painting and using abstract expressionism to make that painting is inherently crazy and messy. And there's not a plan. You don't start with a plan. You're really following your intuition as you're creating the piece. And me, particularly, layering paint and marks and text within the painting and responding to that intuitively. And also, just from my training, understanding what makes a 2D surface visually interesting and all the color theory that goes into that, too.
Yeah.
I really started to think this is such a metaphor for life, right? We were all navigating these surprises. We're all navigating this messy middle, whether it's in what we're dealing with now in the world and in tech. But just like I think throughout our lives, if we look back and are honest with ourselves, that's our trajectory as humans, right? And I think there's next to the mess, there's usually something really beautiful and powerful that happens that when we lean into that mess and we dig into it a little bit more, that's something really powerful and helpful and it connecting happens in those moments. And I went to a workshop right around the time I made the jump to consult on my own, where someone was leading everyone in a group through this timeline exercise to think about mark just random marks on a line, make a line first and mark random dots on a line where life has presented some really intense challenge for you. And just spend a few moments thinking about those and mark those. And then go back on the timeline and mark all these pieces of your life that were really wonderful, like life changing inflection points to your point earlier, too, where something good happened from that inflection point, and mark those. And I had this moment where I realized all these challenging things happened next to all these really incredible things. And everyone else in the room had the workshop facilitator knew what she was doing. Everyone had the
Yeah.
same experience.
No one was just saying, "Oh, it was awful and it stayed
Yeah,
awful and I learned nothing."
yeah, exactly. And revisiting some of that stuff can be really difficult and really traumatic if you haven't spent time processing it in the moment. So I think that exercise needs to be done with care, but I also think that's the beautiful mess right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're really speaking to me. I've never done the structured exercise you described. I haven't put the timeline, but I have enough life experience where I've thought about it. Like there's been moments, and I'm sure we've all had it where it's like, life is over. This is the worst thing possible. But then you see, oh, but it led to this, this, and this. I'm curious. One thing that I'm still grappling with, I feel peace that I have previous life experience to know this is the case. However, when you're still in the mess, it's really, really hard to just go, "Oh, it worked out all these other times." What do you do when you're still in that mess to know, okay, there's a very, very high likelihood we'll learn something from this. Do you have any advice? I'm still
Oh,
figuring it out.
yeah, I am too. And I think that's another work in progress, right? Like I
Yeah.
can say that, but doing it is much harder.
Mhm.
So, also about 10 years ago, I had this huge box of old unused business cards from one of actually, that first gig I was telling you about in New York. That I'd moved around with them for some reason, and I thought, I will keep these because I wanna do an art project with them. At some point, I'll be able to use them. So, I came across those, and I also came across someone who was doing this 365 project. They took some kind of substrate, and they were making art every day for 365 days. And I thought, "Oh, maybe I could do this with my business cards." So I just put primer on every single one of these cards, 365 of them. And for that whole year, I made some kind of random art on those little business cards because I felt like that size was approachable for me to make something
Yeah.
every day while I was also working full time for someone else. So I went through that project and it was so enlightening to me because I looked back and I really saw some of those moments where I really felt like I was in the mess of life or work or something, and I could see that visual
Right.
aftermath and that visual bright spot that happened, and I think oftentimes and I've learned a little bit about grief and how we process grief in this way too, that in the US, we're often told to move on or you've had enough time, like it's time to
Yeah.
move forward. And we're not great at really helping people honor their grief and witnessing their grief. And having those formats where we're acknowledging the mess of whatever is happening and putting it in whatever it may be, like writing or art or anything where you're just able to say, "This sucks and this is messy." And calling it out is half the battle instead of focusing on that bright spot point where we tend to lean into more of like, what's the learning? What's the amazing thing that happened for you? Let's just push away that all the other ugly, messy stuff when really the amazing stuff is happening in that messy time. It's just harder to feel it and connect to it. So I think that there's a lot to be learned in just acknowledging that we're in messiness, right?
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to wanna keep pushing, pushing, and avoid the messiness and somehow get beyond it, but you're absolutely right, like, the messiness, as hard as it is, acknowledging it, taking a pause, and sitting with it is huge.
Yeah, and it's hard to do and it's not pretty. It's uncomfortable. It is emotional. It unearths things for people sometimes, and even learning about grief in the past too, from different coursework and stuff that I've gone through. I've learned too that there are different ways of grief and processing grief. And sometimes if you haven't processed grief and you're processing all at the same time, it can be too much. So you need support in that process, or you need to lean on someone who can help guide you through that too. But I just think we miss out on leaning into what is messy and what is ugly and just
Right.
trusting that looking back, if you look back on your life, the many times that you've survived, clearly we're still here. We've survived it. Right?
We're still here. Do you still have your cards, those 365 cards?
I do. And half of them are visually embarrassing to me. I
Yeah.
actually have on my Instagram feed the whole project. I did a 365 project. I think that's actually where my Instagram feed starts on that project. And I'm recording every day where I made the art. But then I went back and I started collaborating with a photographer who took a picture of me holding the cards every day. And I wrote about the card as my next 365 project.
I know for a lot of us, the last couple of years have been ebbs and flows, but during that time, you've also partnered with others. You were partnering on your workshop, The Art of Being. Can you
Yeah.
tell me about that partnership, how it came to be, and what was the goal behind the workshop?
Yeah. So the workshop is actually the closest to what you're mentioning, probably about helping people through. Those are single day experiences. They have been, or we've done some retreat stuff too. But basically, so I'm collaborating with incredible friend and just brilliant person. Her name is Kirsten Blake, and she's a narrative coach and has a long background in education. She's also a workshop facilitator and has done a lot of facilitation to create this workshop series called The Art of Being. So we set up a studio space essentially. We've done it in lots of different spaces, but we set up a studio space where the first part of the workshop is Kirsten leading people through that narrative coaching and ways of being process, and just focusing on what is a narrative that has not been helpful to you in your past or is currently unhelpful. And then how do you, in little ways, start to weave in a narrative that is more helpful to help you move to a next chapter? And then once they have that focus for the moment, of course, this is a long process to do this
Yeah.
over time, but we take what people have learned from that narrative part, and then I help them create a painting that utilizes some of those processes from abstract expressionist painting. So anyone can do it. You don't have to know how to paint or have any art background, but to start to experience what it's like to have unique expression through color and mark making and writing and pair it with this narrative that you are experiencing.
With helping them paint this new narrative, what is the help involved? Are the participants painting themselves, or are they expressing to you what they're thinking and you're painting for them, or how does that work?
So they're creating their own painting that they take home.
Mhm.
And I do this sneaky way of helping them make their own painting because most people come in and they're like, I don't know what to make. I don't know what to create. And then before they know it, they've made a painting. It's not exactly like a paint and sip, but if you've ever been to a paint and sip where you're painting a dog or, yeah, it's not exactly like that in terms of the process for sure, but in terms of like you kind of surprise yourself that you actually can make a painting if this is not your thing every day. That's what I'm trying to get them to, only connect that to a very personal experience and help them create a painting that's also a talisman. So they leave with this thing that they can put on their wall in their bedroom or on their desk or something that reminds them of how they want to define their narrative going forward for whatever the next chapter is. And that's another goal of it too, right? You're taking this painting and it's this messy abstract expressionist painting, and it's reminding you of what you want to be or how you want to be, I should say.
When we started speaking about your work in this area, something just snapped into place where what our listeners don't know, which I wanted to share, we've been partnering quite a bit where you've come into my cohort with women, mid-career, senior career, who are mapping out what their next act would be and who they'd like to be. And I asked you on our second phone call, just through what I was hearing, would you act as a facilitator and support these women? I felt like we were just meant to meet at this moment because you've come in to help support my cohort, but it became so much more than that. You've been bringing this expertise to the cohort, and I feel so fortunate around that. Do you have any takeaways from your work and what you've been seeing in my cohort? What's helping these women move forward?
Oh, thank you for including me in that cohort. It has been such an incredible experience learning from you and from all the other women. And the conversations that we're having are so helpful. And I think going back to that note of acknowledging and witnessing
Mhm.
is a thread that we can tie between your cohort and the work that you're doing there to bring people together in this that foundation that you've built to acknowledge that this is a messy time that we're in. A lot of people are struggling with AI coming onto the scene and changing how we do what we do. A lot of people are struggling with how the tech world is growing and changing and the direction it's taking. And I think your cohort really acknowledges that you're not alone. You have a group of people that you can explore whatever is next for you together. And that I think is a really powerful thing that you've created. My goal is to create that in some of these workshops too, right? Like everyone is creative. You're not alone if you feel like you can't be creative.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it woke me up when you were talking about the concept of a talisman from your workshop and thinking through this. What really spoke to me, the concept of a talisman to look back to and refer back to for your narrative, to really bring it forward. It's a piece that I've been thinking a lot about when I'm speaking with women in the messy middle, even when they've mapped out their next act vision. There's sometimes these moments of pause, whether it's fear, whether it's mindset narratives or shifts that need to happen, where we can have a whole plan of where we'd like to go for our next act. But if we don't take action, it doesn't happen. And
Yeah.
I've thought about your concept of a talisman. I've been trying to fill that gap. It seems to me when any of us know what we'd like our next act to be, a talisman could be a really, really powerful reference, North Star to keep moving forward. Is that what you find?
Yeah, absolutely. My husband and I have a pretty massive art collection from other artists that we know and some we don't, and things that we have inherited from our families as well. I do think you're creating that talisman in your cohort as well, or multiple talisman in the way that you're like every week there is an exercise and homework that people are putting together, and that's something that they can go back to and look at as a North Star. I think there's so many things that we could bring into our lives that act as that talisman.
Yeah. Well, I had wondered for you and Kirsten with your Art of Being workshop, I had wondered to what degree mindfulness practices come to be part of this when you both were intentionally putting together this process? There's the narrative work, there's the artwork and creating your talisman. Was there an intention really also to have your participants focus on mindfulness and pausing and
Yeah.
reflection?
Yes, absolutely. That is a huge part of both of our personal processes and also part of the workshop. Mindfulness is just something that we both focus on. And yeah, we actually lead people through meditation and parts of the workshop before they make work. That is a part of how they make their painting. And then Kirsten does the same thing when she's doing narrative coaching. That's mindfulness is a big part of what she does. And yeah, there's so much power. And as cliche as it may sound, as much it's been a part of our, I don't know, zeitgeist for a long time, I think the value of it has also been diminished because it's been kind of a buzzword for a while now. But there is so much power in just like taking a beat in any way that is not necessarily supported in the tech world either. Moving fast, failing fast is what you hear more than take a beat, slow down, be mindful about where you're going and go fast in the right direction is what these practices help me do.
Where do you see you've been so immersed in the tech world for quite a while now. You still are. Do you see yourself still in tech in 5, 10 years?
The last few years, the way it's been evolving, I think has been problematic on multiple levels. The things that I love about it, I think can be applied to lots of different areas, and particularly the human centered design side of things, where we're really truly understanding each other and trying to collectively find solutions for problems that exist in our world that are human problems. And if that happens to be a world that collides, I'm also in this sort of exploration mode, which I think art has helped me lean into, where the more I have a plan in a painting and the more I try to make a good painting, the worse the painting is. So I've started to lean more on this. What if I just let go and just see where this painting is taking me? And see what appears. Sometimes I end up making a painting that I'm like, "I can't believe I made that. That was not the plan. It's went in a whole new direction, but I love it even more." So, I'm leaning more into that.
I had wondered, and it's back to when we were saying keeping parts of ourselves hidden or not saying everything that's on our mind. I want to speak this out loud. I feel like our humanity is getting lost, everything being focused on the numbers we bring to the work, the outcomes over output. How do you feel about this? It
Oof.
tires me.
Yeah, that could be a whole podcast. I think that the tech world has lost the plot in terms of creating technology for people. And I think a lot of people like to say their customers are their most important and their business wouldn't exist without their customers. There's a trend toward We just need the data from the customers. We don't need to truly connect with them or truly figure out how we're serving them as long as we're hitting the numbers or we're hitting the goals. And I think there's so much lost in that. Even if the revenue is trending upward, what is lost for the employees who are creating those products and in the lack of connection to their customers?
Mhm.
I think a lot of people in the tech world are feeling very unfulfilled and disconnected and lonely. And I think that has contributed to those things. That lack of humanity has contributed to people feeling
Yeah.
that way. I don't like seeing it trend in that direction. Obviously, I don't think any of us who've noticed it do. I think that we need to get a hold of it really quickly because AI is just furthering that progress more quickly.
I had a conversation with a prospect where, in the dawn of AI, said to me, as a research leader and research expert, would you recommend now to optimize our efficiency for us to use AI moderators and synthesized users? And my heart broke. My
Mine
heart
would too.
broke. I couldn't.
Yeah.
And to your point, where is any of the connection or humanity when the AI is speaking to the AI, and are we uncovering human needs? I see that being a direction we're going.
I feel like speed has become the conversation. Let's do it faster. Let's automate that. Let's take a process that we've been doing forever and just automate most of it because you can get users in a day and you can stand in users in less time. And I have heard that from people. I also have been leaning more into ethnographic research and field research and also trying to communicate. And sometimes I feel like it's completely lost on people that, like, let's not focus on the time that it takes to do field research and ethnographic research. Let's focus on the gains that you're going to be getting across the board, the long term gains, and truly understanding people, not just so your business can serve them, but so your work feels more fulfilling. So you are truly connected with the needs of people and you're solving problems that are uniquely solved by you as a business. It makes me so sad when that's lost on people that they don't get why that would be helpful or important. Some people are so focused on the time that something takes that they're losing the plot. Again, what is getting lost in this process of making everything faster? And I think if we keep leaning into that, we've already seen that happen in the last 10 years, right? That quote comes from Facebook or from Mark Zuckerberg, right? Move fast and break things, I think is the exact quote. We've seen the catastrophic effects of breaking things without thoughtfulness on a cultural level, on a political level. That hasn't been working for us in the past. So why do we think doing it twice as fast with half the thought is going to be better in the next 10 years?
Yeah. Not all of my listeners are mid-career senior women, but most of them are. They're women who are very far into their careers. They still do expect that they have more chapters. They don't know if it will be in the area they've spent their time or evolving and pivoting. For those women who are listening in today, if they were to take just one big lesson away from your story and your experience and our conversation today, what would you want the one big takeaway for them to be?
I think the biggest takeaway is leaning into the messiness a little bit more. I know that's very difficult. And especially when you have pressures right in front of you or needs right in front of you that need to be met or family that needs support. I also think the more that we individually and collectively not acknowledge the hard, the more that we can connect and help find our way through it together. I love that Ram Dass quote that we're all just walking each other home. And we can do that more successfully when we're just acknowledging that we're in it and it's going to be okay. It's maybe not okay right now, but we've made it this far. It's okay that it sucks. We'll get through it at the same time.
Thank you so much. I learned so much. I learned more about you and your process. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with me and the listeners today, Angela.
No, thank you so much for having me, Christine. I love chatting with you, and I've learned a ton from you too. So thanks for having me.